Hey everyone. Hope you guys are all doing okay. Hope you're surviving the midst of the craziness that's going on in the world and in our cities and our counties. I wanted to reach out again this week and send out another video about what specifically we were going to talk about for Sunday nights this week again. Obviously, with everything happening, we're transitioning our service again to online only on Sunday morning, March 22nd as well. And we will also be suspending all programming for children and students and adults throughout the foreseeable future. We're listening to local and national authorities and governments and trying to follow their recommendations. So we won't be meeting this Sunday night, and we'll kind of see whenever we can meet again. But again, I want to give you guys the opportunity to talk in your homes, in your families. I want to give you guys the opportunity to talk among yourself. I'm also trying to think about how to be creative in this time that we are all in our homes separately and apart, practicing good social distance. And with that said, if you have ideas about how we could connect digitally, virtually, I would be open to any ideas you have. Say hello to Willow. She decided she needed to sit by me for this. But if you have any ideas about how we could do that well, I have some ideas as well, but I'm definitely open to any ideas that you guys might have. And let me also say before we dive into the content for this week, I am here for you guys, parents. I'm here for you guys, students, if you're watching this. And I want to be the resource that you need from me in this time. If you need to call me and just complain about this whole situation and complain about being home, I would love to just sit and listen and say I'm sorry. If you just need to talk to somebody, I would love to be that person if you need it. If you need to FaceTime somebody because you're just tired of your family or of your parents or siblings or whatever, please reach out. Kylie and I want to be the resource that you need from us. And seniors, I know this is really hard, especially for you guys as you're thinking about, how this impacts your senior year and possibly the future. Let me just say that you're not alone. Let me just say that you're never alone in this, right? We're all in this together, and we're all trying to figure it out because this is really unprecedented. But if I can be a resource, if Kylie can be a resource, if we can be somebody that you just text or call or FaceTime or whatever, please use us. I would love to be that resource. And similarly, if you have ideas, for us to connect online, but also if you have ideas for content that would be helpful for me to put out, maybe besides this, every Sunday, I would love to hear what those ideas would be, what would be helpful for you guys as we're navigating this time. So again, use us as you need us. I'm happy to go grocery shopping for people or deliver things or whatever in this time. But if you need to call us or whatever, please feel free to use us. With that said, let's dive into content for this week. This week, like last week, we are diving into another spiritual discipline, like we've been doing all semester, right? And this one is kind of connected to what we talked about this last week with prayer. This one is worship. And if you know me at all, you know that worship is one of the ways that I feel like I best connect with God. There are seasons of my life where prayer is really, really impactful, where I feel like I'm really connected through my prayer life to God. But pretty much throughout my whole life, worship has been the place for me to connect most with God. Worship and probably being in nature. Um, I've found a lot of different ways to connect with God in worship, whether that's singing. I've been on some praise teams before, or whether that's just being in the crowd and worshiping, or going to like a Hillsong concert, a Christian concert. I found myself able to connect with God in those times. And as you all know, recently the cat's out of the bag. I've started learning guitar, right? And I'm about a year and a half, almost 2 years into that process, that journey, and I am, still learning for sure. But that has been a new way for me to connect. Playing guitar and leading in that way. It is so scary for me to lead, in musically. I know that I have a decent voice and I know that I can play guitar decently, but it's just intimidating for me still to lead in that way. So that first night, whenever I was playing for the first time in front of you guys, it was so scary for me. But it was awesome, the reception that I got, and it was awesome how it went, even in the midst of my fear and anxiousness. And I even think that I was able to worship in small segments, but to worship in the midst of that, because you guys received it so well, and you guys were worshiping with us. So thank you for that. Thank you for receiving me and accepting me, even in the midst of my fear and all of that. But that whole process has been another way for me to engage and connect in worship with God. And worship, I think, is really important because it's one of the ways that we connect most with God, right? Like we talked about last week, prayer. That's a conversation that we have with God, and a lot of times that feels one way, right? A lot of times it feels like we're talking to God. And I forgot to mention this last week, but one of the other ways that we can practice prayer in a new way is to even just listen. To spend some time just listening in prayer for what God might have to say to us. Because a lot of times we're asking God for this or that, or the other, right? But sometimes God might have things to say to us, but we miss it because we're filling up the time with our thoughts and with our wants and with our desires. So that's another, kind of more on the prayer spectrum. But I'm going to make the case this week that prayer and worship are really connected. Both of them are, yes, spiritual disciplines, but a lot of times what we sing, the words that we sing, if you really pay attention to them, they're prayers to God. They're prayers from our hearts, from our souls to God about what God could do, about what we expect God to do, maybe. That's a lot of what we sing. That and praising God for what He has done, right? So I think these are really, really connected. These two spiritual disciplines, and that's why I wanted to kind of follow up prayer with this talk on worship. Again, worship is really important, and like I mentioned last week, this is the book I was talking about last week. So this is the Spiritual Disciplines Handbook by Adele Calhoun. My favorite book that I've ever been assigned for a school class, at ACU. But one of the things that I love that she says is kind of in her opening line about her section on worship. So she kind of lists out, what worship is, a definition of it, a desire of it, what it includes. So let me read a couple of these things. So she has a quote, first of all, by a guy named Warren Wiersbe. He says, if worship does nothing else for us, it helps us discover the things that are important. Real worship will transform your life. And then she lists desire. The desire of worship is to honor and adore the Trinity as a supreme treasure of life. And then she gives a definition, and this is the part that I really love. She says, worship happens whenever we intentionally cherish God and value Him above all else. Worship reveals what is most important to us. Sorry, my computer logged me out for a minute. That last line, I think, is really, really crucial. Worship reveals what is most important to us. Well, I didn't really like that point. Sorry if you heard that. She is very moany all the time. Worship reveals what is most important to us, and I think that that's really important to think about. I mean, think about your own life or people that you see around you, right? What do people worship? What do people worship? And maybe you think, oh, well, they worship God, right? I would argue that the things that people spend their time and their money on are the things that they worship. Right? If you think about idolatry in the Old Testament, idols were things that took the time and the energy and the effort, the focus, the money, the sacrifices away from God. And that's what got the Israelites in trouble so many times, right? They kept following these idols, these things that at one point some of the prophets make fun of them for being literally wood and stone, right? They're like, how can you worship these things? They're not living. They're not alive. They're like a scarecrow in the field. What do people worship? And I would think about, these days, what do people worship? Maybe right now people are worshiping hand sanitizer and toilet paper, right? What do people worship? I would love for you guys to have that conversation in your families, in your circles. What do people worship? Right? Because those are the things, as Calhoun said, I think she's right on. Worship reveals what is most important to us. So what do people spend their time and their money on? What does their calendar and their checkbook reveal, or their calendar and their bank account reveal about what they think is important, right? What we worship reveals what is important to us. And hopefully the answer to that is God, right? Hopefully the answer to that is God always, first and foremost. But to be honest with you, I spend a lot of time filling my life with stuff that doesn't really matter. I played a video game this morning for a little bit, right? For an hour. I didn't spend time in prayer for an hour. I didn't spend time reading the Bible for an hour. I spent a little bit of time reading the Bible, but not an hour. A lot of times at night, Kylie and I will watch TV, a show or a movie or a couple episodes of something. What am I worshiping? What am I spending my money on? You guys know that I like to spend money on things. I like to buy things, right? What am I spending my money on? What am I worshiping? Because worship reveals what is important to us. I think that's a crucial point about worship and how it's played out in our life. Right? So she lists some scripture about worship, and then she goes on and says practice includes, and gives some highlights of what worship is. She says focusing on focusing on and responding to God with your whole being. Offering my body as a spiritual act of worship. Responding to God's truth with loving obedience. Regularly engaging with a worshiping community. Seeking first the kingdom of God. Keeping secondary things second. I would ask you this week to, like we did with prayer, I would ask you this week to try to experience worship in a new, maybe a different, or more frequent way. A lot of times we save the idea of worship for Sunday morning, right? Or maybe like this last Wednesday we were supposed to have a Wednesday night worship time. And so we reserve those spaces, those rooms, those times for our worship. I'm going to challenge that notion this week. How might you worship in your home? right? For this Sunday and last Sunday, we've asked you to tune in online with us, and hopefully you did. Hopefully you guys watched the live stream, right? Hopefully you watched the broadcast of our service. I think it's incredible that we get to worship even in the midst of all this chaos when we're asked not to come to church. We have the opportunity to worship together, separately, but together. So how might we worship even in the midst of all of this? How might we worship in our own homes, right? Hopefully you're able to do that on Sunday. But I also want to challenge you to worship in a new or more frequent way, right? Like we talked about with prayer. How might changing your posture affect your worship? We talked about this at Checkpoint for those of you who were there with us. But sometimes when we change our posture, it opens up like a whole new way, a whole new world, to be, cheesy and cliche with Disney quotes there. But a whole new way of worshiping, right? Maybe you want to try standing while you worship. Maybe you want to try lifting a hand, right? Or lifting both of them, right? Maybe you want to go down here and lift them up this way. I don't know. I don't know what you're what you want to try to be different in the way that you worship, but change your posture maybe. Maybe worship from your knees. Maybe worship like look up a picture of a cross and set that up and worship in front of that. And you don't have to do this in front of your family either, right? You could do this in your room. You could go into your room and turn on some worship music and worship by yourself. That's okay. And you don't even have to listen to music. I think looking, maybe you want to go for a walk and just kind of worship while you're walking around. See the different colors in the world, right? Notice the things around you. Notice the different animals and all the intricacies of the different animals, the different bugs, the different plants, all the things that make up what we see outside. There's a book called Altar to the World. And in that book, Barbara Brown Taylor talks about how everything we see is God's creation, right? So what if you just went on a walk and worshiped in that way? Or maybe like we've done before, maybe you want to try soaking. Maybe you want to just play some songs and just rest in the presence of God, rest in the midst of all of the craziness, right? Play some songs and just worship. Maybe it's silently, maybe it's quietly, maybe it's loudly, but worship. I want to challenge you this week to worship in a new or different or more frequent way. And I would challenge you guys to have a conversation with your families. Have a conversation in the midst of this. Again, kind of like we did with prayer. I'm going to keep going back to that conversation. But in what ways has worship been hard for you? In what ways has worship been easy for you? Talk about your experiences with worship with one another. Parents, talk about your experience with worship. How has worship been something that's come really easy or something that's come really hard? What are times or instances in your life when you've most connected with worship? What are ways or postures that you've most connected with worship? Why is worship important to you? How has worship formed your faith? How has worship reminded you of who God is and who God says He's going to be? Worship reveals what is most important to us. And hopefully that answer is God, right? But I challenge you this week to worship in a new or different or more frequent way, and have conversations together as a family about worship and how how you've experienced worship in your life. Maybe try to worship together as a family. That's the challenge for this week. That's the conversation for this week. I would love to hear how these talks are going, what fruit is coming out of it. I think it's really cool that we get to to worship even in the midst of all of this. And you might be saying, worship is really hard for me right now because we are practicing social distance, because we're not able to go to the physical building of the church, because I'm so anxious about what is happening in the world. Let me remind you that God is who he says he is, and he will do what he says he will do, and he has done what he says he has done. God is constant, and God, again, is bigger than any of this. Right? We worship a God who is always present, who is always with you. And even in the midst of the anxiety and fear possibly that's happening, there's reason to worship. Think about the things that God has done in your life. Think about the blessings that you have. There's reason to worship our incredible God because of what he has done and what he says he will do. So, I ask you this week, I challenge you this week, to worship in a new or a different way, to have these conversations about worship as a family, and to worship possibly more frequently than you usually do, because worship reveals what is most important to us. I'm here for you guys. If you need anything, please reach out to me. And if you have any ideas as far as what would be good content, or how we can connect virtually in this season, feel free to reach out to me as well. I would also love to hear feedback on how these conversations go, how these worship experiences go. We'll talk to you later.